Then King David said to the whole assembly, you guys take a seat. Then King David said to the whole assembly, several thousand people, my son Solomon, the one who God has chosen, is young and inexperienced. The task is great because this palatial structure is not for man, but for the Lord God, Jehovah Elohim, the commander of the armies of heaven. With all my resources as king of the treasury of Israel, I have provided for the temple of my God, gold for the gold work, silver for the silver, bronze for the bronze, and iron for iron, and wood for wood, as well as onyx in the settings of turquoise stones in various colors, and all kinds of fine stone and marble, all of these in large quantities. Besides that, in my devotion to the temple of my God, I now give my personal treasures of gold and silver for the temple of my God, over and above everything I have provided for his temple. $4.7 billion of gold, the prized and rare gold of Ophir, $188 million of refined silver for the overlaying of the walls of the buildings and all the work to be done by master craftsmen. Now, who is willing to consecrate themselves to the Lord today? Then the leaders of the families, the men, the husbands and fathers and brothers, the officers of the tribes of Israel, the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, the generals, the admirals, the senators, and the governors, all gave willingly. They collectively gave toward the work of the temple of God $75 billion in raw gold and $3.7 million in gold coins, $250 million in silver, $68 million in bronze, and $5.7 million in iron. Anyone who had precious stones, diamonds, rubies, emeralds, they gave them to the treasury of the temple of the Lord in the custody of Jehiel the Gershonite, whose name means God lives. The people rejoiced at the willing response of their leaders, whose giving was in excess of $100 billion, for they had given freely and wholeheartedly to the Lord. David also rejoiced greatly. David praised the Lord in the presence of the whole assembly, saying, "Praise to you, Lord, the God of our father Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. Yours, Lord, is true greatness, valiant power, glorious beauty, and the highest rank of majesty and splendor. For everything in the land of golden streets, heaven, and on this ball of dirt we call earth, is yours. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom, the realm where you alone sit as king. Wealth, my bank account, and honor, my reputation and image, come from you. You are the ruler of all things. In your hands is strength known only by the angels surrounding your throne. You have sheer unbridled power to promote, grow, and give resolute strength to all men and women. Now, our God, we give you thanks. We throw down these treasures before you and praise your name, which is more beautiful and glorious than all the jewels and diamonds in the world. But who am I? A nobody sheep herder with a ratty old slingshot, now king over all this. And who are my people who continually stray and sin against you every time you restore us, that we should be able to give as generously as this? Everything comes from you, and we have returned to you only what comes from your hand to begin with. We are strangers in your sight, as were all our ancestors, because we are all sinners, and you alone are holy. Our time on earth and all the money and stuff we could possibly accumulate during our lifetime is like a shadow. These things can provide no hope whatsoever. Lord our God, all this abundance that we have provided, that we brought here for building you a temple for your name, it all comes from your hand, and all of it belongs to you. God, I know you examine our hearts and are pleased that all these things have been given joyfully and willingly. Lord, the God of our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, keep these desires in the hearts of your people forever. Guard them and preserve their loyalty to you. And give my son Solomon the wholehearted devotion to keep you first and to do everything to build the palatial structure for which I have provided. Then David said to the people, "Praise the Lord your God." And so they all praised the Lord by doing this. They bowed down, stretching their bodies out on the ground to signify full surrender before the Lord, Jehovah, the everlasting one. and their king David, the well-dressed shepherd. And then several hundred years later, Jesus told the people who were surrounding him, who were following him, if anyone has ears to hear, let them hear. Consider carefully what you hear. With the measure you use it, it will be measured to you, and even more. Whoever has will be given more, and whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. So God, I ask again, God, that you would change the very nature of our hearts tonight. For the rest of our lives, you would change how we handle your money. And I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. I hope this isn't too distracting. This thing lost a leg here. It's a amputee. This, as I said in the opening, this message is. I have not been able to get through. I have to kind of. I don't have always a lot of time. And one sitting to go through my whole notes. I have yet to been able to get through even some sections of this without crying, and so I'm just going to throw this out there. I'm probably going to cry several times, and you'll just have to deal with it. And if you cry too, and you should be wearing waterproof mascara anyway, unless you're a guy and you should never wear it. Some of these stories I'm going to share are from my life, and the only reason I'm sharing them, just kind of intro caveat here, the only reason I'm sharing them is because of who God is and what I know his desires are for our hearts, not for anyone to think well of me or anything like that. But we're going to dive right in. The passage I read is in 1 Chronicles 29. It's the end of 1 Chronicles. If you think the Old Testament is outdated, it doesn't apply. They're making all these movies about biblical stuff now, which is, fine if they're actually biblical, but somebody should make a life. You should make a life. Somebody should make a movie about the life of David and carry the story from 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, because you talk about like Indiana Jones meets Braveheart, meets like Gladiator. It's all in there. It's like epic. You could have an awesome movie series with that. So, 1 Chronicles 29 is where that passage came from, and you can tell I like action movies. Basically what has happened at that point is God has told David, you're going to provide the resources to build me a temple. You're not actually going to be the one to build it because you've had too much blood on your hands in various parts of his life, but your son is going to be the one to build it for me. And so Solomon is the one that builds the temple, and this is kind of the lead in to gathering the resources for that. 1 Chronicles 29, verse 11 and 16. I want to look at two things real quick. David's prayer, he says, yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor. For everything in heaven and earth is yours. Yours, O Lord, is the kingdom, and you are exalted as head over all. Next verse is 16. These are kind of similar, so we're putting them together. He says, O Lord our God, as for all this abundance that you have provided for building a temple for your holy name, it comes from your hand, and it all belongs to you. The version I was reading was the New King James Version. It'll be coming out. Stores, never. There's some things we talked about last week that we're going to pull into this week, and some stuff is just going to be brand new. There is a commonality with generous people. We talked about generosity last week. There's a commonality with generous people in that many of them have money, but money doesn't have them. King David, almost $5 billion just in what we know that was his gold. That's some money for starters. That'll get you a few places. But he wasn't so attached to it that he couldn't let it go. I'm going to ask you a question. If you get money, let's say it's you work, you earn money. Let's say it's a gift. Let's say it's that lucky day you're walking out of Bed Bath & Beyond, and there's a $20 bill tumbling down the sidewalk, and there's no one in sight, and it's just like, thank you. We all like that. But when money enters your possession, do you assume that it's for you to spend on yourself? Or do you think that it's possible that God might be entrusting you with his money to use to meet the need of someone or something else? That's a filter that people that are generous, that's ingrained in their nature. That's a filter that they often look through, and so the result is this. Generous people often buy less than they can afford because all the money that they have might not be for their consumption. And this stems from the root of that understanding, and it's simply this, is I own nothing. I'm a temporary steward. If you've ever been to a burial, not a memorial service, a burial, when they put the casket in the ground, there's, sometimes they're not as stealthy as others. Sometimes they'll have the backhoe like 20 yards off, and you know what the backhoe's there for? Like, there's not a U-Haul next to the backhoe, okay? Nobody gets a U-Haul dumping stuff out in their hole. I watched it one time, and that was enough for me. Okay? That was a recentering that I needed at that point in life. I own nothing. And I like to think of it like this. I'm a very visual person. This has a few names. Joel works at Home Depot. He's the guy I see when I need things and need people to pray for me while I'm working on projects. Joel, what's the name for this? PVC pipe. Less specific. It's called a conduit. It's conduit. It's just there's other names for it. It's made out of PVC. We are this. The job of a conduit, and these are used for, this particular one is a drain pipe. These are used for transporting power lines, gas lines, not these specific ones, but conduits in general, water, sewer, drainage, so many things. This is the life of how we have life. All of these electrical lines come through conduits. And the job of every conduit is to get things from point A to point B with as little resistance as possible. Plumbers have a tool for rounding out the edge here when they cut it to make sure there's no barbs, there's nothing to grab on, even a small little thing, because they know over the course of time things will grab and things will block and things will hold, and then all of a sudden you have this and there's nothing coming out here. We are conduits. We're just vessels. We don't take any of this stuff we have with us. And it is my job to get what is given to me here, out here, as smoothly, as effortlessly, and as resistance-free as possible. Because everything I have comes from him. And I'm only able to give out here because I've received up here. Now, some of this is food in the pantry, and some of this is insurance. Unfortunately, some of this is taxes and all sorts of different things, but the flow should be no different. When I told you guys last week that when I worked up in New Jersey, I'd have to go into New York City once a week. There was a particular morning that I was at the train station. I had to get on the train at the Morristown train station. The train left about 6:45 in the morning for me to get to the office on time, and I got there about 6:30 like I normally did. And I'm out there in the waiting area where the train tracks are, and this guy approaches me. Now, you all know what this guy looks like. Okay, you weren't there, but you all know what this guy looks like because he's at a lot of train stations. And he comes up to me, and he just kind of, it's like, hey, do you have $2 so I need $2 more to get a train ticket? And just, I mean, in a half second, I had the thought, I actually do have $2. I don't normally have cash with me, but I actually do have $2 in my wallet. And the thought was, God, it's all your money. Okay. And so I took my wallet out, gave him $2, went back into the train booth, and I'm just expecting to see this guy going out parking lot, getting into some ratty car and running down a liquor store or something. And about 4 or 5 minutes later, he comes back out. He just kind of looks at me, and he just kind of does, the thank you, and I'm just like, oh, I got nothing else to do. I'm not good with awkward conversations like that, so I just decided to start one, and said, I said, so where are you going? And he said, I'm going up to, I was meant to look it up, East Orange or East Cranberry or something. Everything's named after something like that up there. But he said something with a cranberry and orange or something in it, and I said, what's there? I said, where are you going to this morning? And he kind of stopped, and he looked down at the ground, and he looked up at me, and he said, I'm going to check myself into rehab this morning. And I'm sitting there, stone-faced. I mean, what do you say to that? And so, me and my genius, I just said, do you have faith? Like, what? I mean, those words come out of my mouth, and, like my conscience over here is like, that was great, you idiot. Like, do you have faith? I mean, ask him if he's had a cup of coffee. Like, I mean, where do you even start? Do you have faith? And this guy just launches into this little, 5-minute vignette of his life story, and he had been attending church, and he had, done that thing, and he just kind of fallen away, and he was just like, he's like, I don't even know what my life looks like anymore, and I'm like, give this guy $2, and we launch into this life conversation amidst everybody else that's gathering around us at the train station to go to New York City. And I'm telling you, I wish I could say I was always this bold in my faith, but I saw the train coming down the tracks. I saw the headlight, and I knew we had about 2 minutes. And so I put my hand on his shoulder. His name was Junior, and I said, Junior, can I pray for you? And I prayed for him like I would pray in front of anybody in a church, and there's lots of people around that I'm sure didn't know Jesus, and they probably thought I was weird. And the train pulls up, and I don't mean to over-dramatize this, but it was like this scene that you've seen 100 times in a movie. He gets up on the step of the train, and he grabs onto the silver handle next to it, and he looks back at me, and he has tears about to fall down his face, and he just says, thank you. My job that morning was to get $2 back here. Is this thing warranted? $2 back here, where my wallet usually is, from over here to his hand to buy a train ticket to check himself into rehab and change the trajectory of his life as smoothly and as effortlessly as possible. That was my job that morning. Generous people are not owned by money. The second thing is this: generous people are free to use what God has given them. See, American Christianity says a lot of times this: hey, look, we have more, so we can have more. Like, you have more, so you should have more. When I was building my first house, I went to a bank, and the guy's looking at, the financials thing, the credit score and everything, and I quote, you need to build a bigger house. It's like, You know what his thought process was? Because you can, you should. Because you can, you should. You can build a bigger house. Why won't you? Jesus talked about something kind of similar to that. Jeff talked about a couple weeks ago in Luke 12. The guy, it wasn't a house, it was a barn. He said, I got too much stuff. I got to have more room for my stuff. I'm going to build bigger barns. And he builds bigger barns. He's in the process, and God's like, that's enough heartbeats for you? you fool. And Jesus says to his followers in Mark chapter 4, if we can pull that up, verse 23 to 25, he said, if anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. Consider carefully what you hear, he continued. With the measure you use it, it will be measured to you, and even more. For whoever has will be given more, and whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. So Jesus says, to the measure you use what? To the measure you use what you hear. Jesus talked about, more than anything else in the Gospels, money. Because he knows, we talked about it last week, we have this longing for more, and that longing for more is satisfied in Christ alone. Everything else, it may hold a little bit of water for a little bit, but it's going to drop out. And then we're going to be empty again, and we're going to try to fill that cistern up, but the problem is the cistern's broken. Jesus had two core messages. This life is not about you, and beware of money. And he says, to the measure you use it, it will be measured against you. The world says you need to store, you need to save up, you need to hoard up, you need to pile up, you need to, kind of gather up. Jesus says, look, you are free to use what I've given you. You're free. You can invest it, you can give it, you can find another use for it. But I've entrusted you with this. But understand, you're going to have to answer for it. The master came back. He had entrusted the servants. He didn't just leave them a sticky note saying, here's a bag of money. See ya. It says he entrusted his servants with it. In the parable of the talents, he gives 1 5, 1 2, 1 1. Even the one was, as Jeff talked about a couple Sundays ago, the one was a ton of money. It's not like he gave, somebody a quarter. The master said, look, it is yours to use for me. None of the servants were keeping the proceeds. There's a box that goes in the ground at the end. There's no winning ticket that pours in on top of you. The I own nothing mentality comes from the understanding that it's all God's money, and he can do more with less than we can even get our minds around. As a missionary in China in the late 60s, his name is John Bechtel. I've met John a couple times. He and his wife were going to minister in Hong Kong, and at this point in history, in the life of China, Hong Kong had about 4 million people. 2 million of those 4 million were under the age of 18. You think they had any problems in Hong Kong? You better believe it. And so they're trying to figure out, how can we help? How can we minister? What can we do? They go to this organization and say, hey, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to start a camp for kids, for the youth, to try to help. We can't help the whole problem, but we can help part of the problem. And so do you have any piece of land that we can use? So he said, well, we do have an island. It's called Sunshine Island. It's about 153 acres, I think. And the problem is you're going to need to build a pier. He said, well, how much does a pier cost? He says, about $40,000. This is 70s. Just factor in 5 times whatever the cost is, I'm telling you. That's about the rate of inflation. So roughly $200,000 at that time. So they start praying a couple months. They can't come up with the money. They're like, I don't think this is where we're supposed to go. He said, do you have anything that is maybe, with all these kids, that would be on the beach? And they said, well, we actually do have a piece of property. It's about 7 acres. It's on the beach. The problem is there's infrastructure that's missing, and that's going to cost about $40,000. So John's like, okay, $40,000 is a magical number. So they start praying. A couple months go by. Still nothing. Well, there had been a facility that had been built called Sundown, that was later named Sundown Camp. Do we have the pictures? Yes? Yes. Oh, there. I'm sorry. I'm normally going back there. This is Sundown Camp. You can just keep going through them. This was already built. The company that, the organization that built the camp, was having some financial trouble. And the board of directors at the banks that loaned them the money said, well, we gotta do something with it. We're taking it away from you. John found out about this. He said, hey, this is what we're trying to do. This would be perfect for us, right in the heart of downtown Hong Kong. And they said, this property was just built for $1 million, $5 million today. This was just built for $1 million. They said, we can't give it to you, but we can sell it to you. And the $40,000 was in there for sure. It was just $240,000. And so John's like, oh my goodness, I don't know. Well, a few days later, he talks to this guy who's a very prominent business person. Says, John, I'm going to go back to the United States, and I'm going to raise all the money that you need to buy that camp. And about 3 or 4 months later, he gets a letter from this guy. And the letter starts like this. It says, Dear John, I'm so sorry to inform you that I was not able to raise any money for the camp. The letter goes on, and John is just heartbroken as he's reading this. And at the end of the letter, it says, P.S. Enclosed you will find an envelope and a letter. Let me get her name right. From Belinda Holmes. And he opens the letter. It says, Dear Mr. Bechtel, enclosed is my ice cream money for 2 weeks. Did you use it to buy the orphanage? The board of directors sold the $1 million facility for 4 quarters in downtown Hong Kong. It opened in 1971. Since 1971, over 1.5 million Chinese youth have come through that camp, about 120,000 of those giving their life to Christ for the first time ever. Years later, John is in Paris, France, eating at a Chinese restaurant. He starts talking to the waiter because he knows Chinese. The waiter is Chinese. Well, guess who went to Sundown Camp? His waiter. And he starts talking with the waiter. He says, I gave my life to Jesus at that camp. John's like, I can't believe this. I started the camp. He's like, you started the camp? He goes back in the kitchen. The cook comes out. The cook went to Sundown Camp, gave his life to Jesus for 4 quarters that were surrendered to God, where they came from to begin with. Belinda Holmes gave her heart to Jesus, and because of that, she was free to use these 4 quarters that God had entrusted with her. And I think she was about 10 years old at the time. 1 Chronicles 29, verse 14. Says, who am I, and who are my people, that we should be able to give to you as generously as this? Everything comes from you, and we have given to you only what comes from your hand. Let me tell you something about generous people. God loves to give to generous people. You want to have an exciting life, be a generous person. Because generous people do 2 things. They give him credit, and they can be trusted with money that God gives them in their possession, that it's neither for them nor for their consumption. A guy was sharing a story with me last year. He saw on Facebook one day that some friends of his were in a pretty difficult financial situation. They had wrecked one of their 2 cars. It was their fault. They didn't have good insurance. They were basically out in a very difficult situation. Their family didn't have money to help them. They were living paycheck to paycheck. They're both just really, just people you just love. Just love the Lord. just do everything they can to give to others and serve others, and we're just in a difficult place. And this guy he's sharing the story with me, and he sees this, and everybody kind of posts on Facebook praying for you, and they don't really pray for you, and you're like, I don't know, do you like that? Do you like that, or do you not like that? Like, I don't know. So we'll just put praying for you. And he said the next day he's reading through Acts in his quiet time in his living room, and he is struck by something in Acts chapter 4. In the end of Acts chapter 4, and I'm just paraphrasing here, but Acts chapter 4 basically says this. It says, all the believers were in one heart and mind. No one claimed to have any possessions of their own. It says the grace of God works so powerfully that from time to time those who owned land and houses sold them. Those who had stuff sold stuff. And the money was brought to the apostles, the church at the time, and it was given to those who had need. And basically no one ever had needs because they always had the needs to meet the needs, or the means to meet the needs. And he's reading this, and he's like, God, I just want to see you. I want to see you working. I want to see your church. I mean, these are people that were on the earth when Jesus left footprints. And they're just like, this is all we know to do. And so I'll just describe it as best I can. He said, God put this number in front of me. And he had actually just sold something that he had made some money on, and God was like, I want you to take that amount of money from there, and I want you to give it to them. And it's not a small amount of money. And he said, all right. I think I'm hearing you clearly. I think your word is reflecting your heart, and so okay. And so they correspond over Facebook for a few days, and they arranged to meet at Cheddar's up in Gainesville on Sunday, which happened to be the husband's birthday. And the guy he's sharing this story with me, and he says I'm walking up to the Cheddar's. He said, I've got tears in my eyes. And they're there, and they don't know what is going on at all. And he just hands them this envelope. And the envelope has a note and a check folded in half. And in a matter of minutes, the three of them are weeping outside of Cheddar's in Gainesville. Sunday afternoon after church. Everybody's there. You got three people who are sobbing like they've just lost someone in the parking lot. And he said the wife is just, he said my shirt was wet. The wife is just crying, just sobbing because they have no means of meeting their needs. And so the logical question is like, why is he crying? Like, he just gave up this large sum of money. They're the recipients. I mean, this is the grace that has been given out of nowhere, and it's just come to us. You didn't ask for it. You weren't seeking it. You didn't expect it, and you're overwhelmed. Like, you get why those people are crying. But why was he crying? He basically said this. He said, I was so overwhelmed that God would trust me. He said, there's 183,000 people in Hall County. He said, how many of them do you think have that much money in their bank account? Probably half, 90,000 people, a large football stadium. And God calls your seat. And he said, I trust you with that money to take it, and it smoothly, effortlessly, resistance-free. You make arrangements to give it to them. And he said, he's sharing the story, and it's just like, it's like God would trust me like that. He said, there is not an honor in this world that man could bestow on me that would ever compare to that. Get from A to B with as little resistance as possible. that was where I had originally planned on kind of ending the message. And about 13 days ago, God decided He was just going to just show up yet again. I got an email from a buddy of mine, Ricardo. When we pull up this next set of pictures, Ricardo is one of my best friends. I met him when I was in Myrtle Beach. He's just had a heart for sharing the gospel in France, for the French people. It sounds great and glorious. That was Ricardo in that last picture. This is their church. That's him singing there. He's got an awesome voice. That is Bree, the city in which they're ministering to. Looks great. You can go back to the. Can you go back to the shot of the town? Next one back. I'm sorry. Next one back. You just leave that up there. Ricardo sends me an email once a month. He's a missionary that we've supported for several years, and this email was different than most of the normal updates. Some very candid sharing of some of the needs of their church and of him personally. And I was reading the email, and there was something that caught my eye, and it was that their church is in desperate need of a piece of equipment, that camera that you saw at the end there. And I don't know how to describe this. It takes them hours and hours and hours to get every service loaded up online. And he said they literally have people who are seemingly waiting for the next service to be uploaded so that they can watch, because there's so few churches. There's so little Jesus in France. It's sickening. And I'm reading this email, and I just had this just heart, just God all up in me, saying, you're going to take that camera. See, a couple of weeks ago, when my plane ticket got purchased for going to Uganda in a few weeks, I'm actually staying later than everyone else, and I was hoping selfishly at that point that I could spend some time with Ricardo, because I've seen him for about 3 hours in the last 4 years. And he's one of my best friends, and that'll be about the norm probably. And so my ticket had been purchased, and I was supposed to have a layover for about a half day in Paris. And I was reading that email, and I just felt like God saying, you're going to take that camera. And I was like, okay, maybe. Okay, we'll see about that. And so I clicked on the camera. It was a Panasonic camera, and it took me to the Panasonic website. And I went, I don't know if I heard from you. I don't know if that was you. That camera is over $2,000. And, I felt like I got a little sick, frankly. I was like, God, you're going to have to do something. So I went on Amazon like any good shopper, and Amazon had it for about $1,000. It's like, oh, God, you're still going to have to do something. And a few hours later, I get a text message from a contractor that we've worked with, our company has worked with for since I've been there. He runs a small crew, does a lot of side jobs, and had this particular property in Gainesville that just by nature of the timing and of the work, he had been awarded, through the bid process and everything, a bunch of work over the last 3-4 months. And he calls me and he says, can you meet me over at this apartment complex? I was planning on going over there anyway, so I was sure I'll be there in about 15 minutes. And I get over to the apartment complex, and he's throwing some of his trash in our dumpster, and that's fine. And he hands me an envelope and basically just says, thanks for all the work that you've given us last few months. This is a slow season, and we've had so much work. It's just thank you. And there's $750 in that envelope. Several hours after I get this email, several hours after I feel like God's saying, you're going to take that somehow. I don't know, I'm like, I don't know how. So I'm like, okay, well, 750 is great. The next day, I had gotten a call about doing some landscape consultation that I do on the side, which was another $40. And so I'm like, okay, I'm about at 800 now. 200 would be great somehow. And so we had planned on, we had the meeting for Uganda, and we're going to have to take $200 to pay for our visas. We had all our other expenses covered. And Amber sends me an email Monday morning, and there's a family at this church that we didn't send a letter to, that I've never spoken with. She said, we just got a donation. We just got to check in. And I asked her how much, and I already knew how much it was. It was the other 200. In 72 hours, God said, I just want to take this simple piece of equipment, and I want to take it from Gainesville, Georgia, by means of a dumpster and some landscaping and just this whatever. And we're going to send it to this place that is so desperate for Jesus. They have people seemingly clamoring on their website for the next service to be uploaded. Someone once said to me in reference to my giving, they said, it's never going to be enough for you, is it? I said, nope. God loves to give to generous people because they give him credit and they can be trusted with his money. We're conduits. Getting stuff from A to B with as little resistance as possible. If you get money, do you assume it's to spend on yourself, or do you think God might actually be entrusting money with you? There wasn't a second that passed that I thought that money that was in that envelope was ever for me. Let me get that right. Get that straight. Do you feel free to use, give, and invest what God has entrusted to you? Or is it an inner struggle? Because if it's an inner struggle to give to others, I'll just be honest, it's not because you have money, it's because it has you. Everything comes from him. It is for him, and we give only because he already has. So God, I just beg you, I know the power. I know the power that money has over us. I know the desire of so many hearts in this world to just have more stuff, but God, would you somehow get through to us that none of it comes with us? That we get so tired of the stuff that we have that we are excited to get so fast, whether it's a few months or a few years, and that our hearts are what you fight for, and that the money that you give us is meant to sustain us, but it's meant to be used freely for you. And so I just ask in this time of worship and reflection, God, that those of us who need to do some surrendering would do some surrendering. I ask this in Jesus' name.